Well, just to be mindful of our time, let's go ahead and get started. I see that we're at the top of the hour, so just want to welcome everybody. Thank you so much for taking the time this afternoon and join us for this follow-up session today. My name is Fernando, and I'm with the Region 9 Head Start Association, and it is just my pleasure to be here as your webinar host for this afternoon. So if you have any questions about this session, experience any issues with any logistical items, chat, audio issues, video issues while you're here with us, feel free to send me a chat message and I'll do my best to address it behind the scenes. So let me know how I can be supportive. Just so you're aware, this session is being recorded and will be made available for on-demand access roughly within the next 24 to 48 hours. And all of our recordings go up on our YouTube channel. So be on the lookout for a follow-up email that's going to contain a link to this session as well as part 1. So that way you can see the entire series, revisit some of this wonderful information, as well as just get some more information if you want to. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our topic for this afternoon, using culturally responsive children's books to support family engagement, part 2. And our speaker this afternoon is Rebecca Armstrong with Raising a Reader. And I hope you all enjoy this phenomenal session we have planned for you. And now take it away, Rebecca.
Thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen and we're going to get started. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. I really appreciate you taking the time out. This is part 2 of our 2-part series. And so if you missed the first part, I know it was recorded, but I wanted to take just a moment for those of you, if you didn't get to come about 20 days ago or so, I can just kind of give you an overview of what we reviewed last time. And that was really, we got into just the tip of the iceberg on this topic, and we talked about key practices for educators in supporting culturally responsive family engagement. And so these were five topics that we discussed back on June 4th. Is, you know, when you're thinking about culturally responsive family engagement, it's about building relationships, being present, honoring and promoting existing knowledge of those families, promoting that culture of awareness, fostering community by building social capital, and identifying and using what works for each family. So if I were to take all 5 of these specific points for responsive family engagement, we're going to pull out promoting a culture of awareness, learning, and sharing, because that's really the topic of this the whole point of our webinar, is really using children's books as a way to be culturally responsive and promote that family engagement. So I just wanted to make sure you had that from the last time we met. So today we're going to talk about tools and evaluating your library, whether it's your classroom library, whether it's your Raising a Reader program, whether it is any program that you're doing with your children and families. I shared this last week, but I think it's worth reiterating that, you know, for school year 2021, over half the students enrolled in public schools identify as people of color. We know but that by 2025, 1 in 4 students will be English language learners, as predicted by the NEA. And in 2016, over half of all US babies under 1 year old were racial or ethnic minorities. Knowing that, we know that the state of children's books is not where it should be. So we heard over half of the children identify themselves as people of color. However, if you look at this document, over half of the children's books published in 2018, this is over 3,100 children's books, featured a protagonist or a main character that was white. So we know that there's this huge disconnect. We know the publishing industry has improved, but it's still not where it needs to be. So what do we do in a world with over half the books being published every year in children's books are children that are white, when over half the children that are in our classrooms that we're serving are children of color? That's really our responsibility, to create a culturally diverse library. And how do we do it, and what does it look like? So that's what we're going to talk about today. And again, we did review these last time, but I'll just go over them briefly. These are texts that engage children, that have the windows and mirrors. So Rudine Sims Bishop coined it so well, and she really explained it for us years and years ago, that children should be able to see themselves It is so validating when you see yourself, when you see your family structure, when you see your language in the text of a book, and you can see other worlds around you. Of course, books are also the sliding glass doors. And if you haven't heard Rudine Sims Bishop talk about this, you can go into YouTube and just put her right in, and she gives a very eloquent explanation of this. A culturally diverse library calls out misrepresentations and stereotypes, and it has a range of experiences within a group or cultures, so both within and outside of specific cultures and groups. Should include immigrant experiences, diversity within racial or ethnic groups, about children, books about children who are biracial or multiracial, books that show immigrants, I mentioned that, books that show a wide range of cultures. They should also have books that represent lifestyles. So it could be adoptive parents, single parent families, grandparent, LGBTQIA+ families, multi-generational families, whatever the family structure is. And we know my family, your family, the children's families that we serve all have very different family structures. So having a range, it's not always a male and a female parent and two children, a boy and a girl. We want to make sure also that books show male and female characters and positive roles that break gender and role stereotypes. So I love Rosa Loves Dinosaurs and Clive is a Librarian because, again, typically in mainstream, the boys are with the dinosaurs and women are the only ones that can become a librarian. We want to make sure that we have books that portray children with disabilities positively and as active, capable main characters, not people who always need help or people who can't accomplish goals. We want able and differently abled children from all racial and ethnic groups, genders, and classes as active participants in the stories, not just the sidekick. So those are some things, and then we're going to talk about evaluating. So just in the chat, feel free to put in what other things should we be thinking about when we're choosing books? What other things should we think about when we're choosing children's books? So again, feel free to put it in the chat. I'll revisit it at the end of talking about evaluating books. Again, we're just reaching the tip of the iceberg here. So let's talk about evaluating children's books. So you have books, maybe you're not choosing new books, but you need to evaluate what you have for children for bias. Three categories that I typically put things in are context, omission and representation, and illustrations. So we make sure we look at the author and illustrator background. We know, of course, I could write a beautiful book about a family that is not like mine or that I'm not represented in. However, the power comes from when you have an author or illustrator who are writing from their own experiences. The copyright date. So we have beautiful books, award-winning books that might be 20, 30, 50 years old. And perspectives then might not have been as aware as the perspectives we have now. It could be outdated. So making sure you look for those copyright dates. Omission and representation. So we talked about having books that are representative of a wide range of families, of cultures, of ethnicities, of languages. However, when you specifically omit a certain group, that is its own form of bias. You want to make sure you have those positive, affirming representations and look for tokenism. We'll talk a little bit about that later. Of course, look at the illustrations. There could be offensive images. The characters, are they accurately represented? And do the illustrations match the story? We know sometimes they don't. We know sometimes what might be an offensive image to one family might not be to another. We know at Raising a Reader, we've had books from a wide range of cultures, and sometimes the culture might be different than ours here in the United States. So it could be children doing things in other countries that maybe only older children do here in the US. So those are books where we really want to be careful and make sure that we are representing those cultures accurately. So here's some other criteria. Another 3 categories is storyline, authenticity, and language. So what's the message of the storyline? Does it promote respect? Are characters shown in positive leadership roles? So it's not always the character of color that's the sidekick, or just, oh, well, you know, we have a classroom full of kids in this storybook. Well, there's some kids in the background are children of color. Is the message affirming to children from diverse backgrounds? So check for that also when we get to authenticity, check for inaccuracy and inappropriateness. Sometimes some of the books that we hold beloved to us that we grew up with are actually inappropriate. The language, there could be problematic words. Maybe that's the word such as savage. Maybe it's the word heathen. There's so many words that could be very problematic that we don't want, you might not want to promote it for your children using them as readily as they are in a book. Our language and dialects used respectfully. It's not used as a joke because someone has a certain accent or someone speaks a certain dialect. I know this is a lot of text on this page, and I will pull out a few, but we really want to be aware of stereotypes. So, such as all Muslims are Arab, all Asian American Pacific Islanders are good at martial arts or really good at computers. People with disabilities are not independent or to be pitied. American Indians live in teepees. They carry bows and arrows. They're half naked all year round. African American men are gang members or underemployed. African American women might be in roles of servitude, oversexed, or maybe they're the welfare moms. Latino men talk funny, like I just said, are lazy. Maybe they're gang members or wear oversized sombreros. So we really want to be aware of some of these stereotypes. Strong, independent girls and women are man-like. So if I'm female president of the United States in a book, does that mean I'm male-like? I can't be feminine and also have a leadership role. So again, a lot of text on this slide, but I felt it needed to include as many stereotypes as I could think of. Also be aware of concept books that use culture or ethnicity as an object to be counted. So this book that I've kind of covered up here is 10 Little Indians. And when you look at the title, kind of beneath the red, you see the character has a very large face, has long hair. It's dressed in, could be traditional clothing with drums, and we're going to count them through the book. So it exaggerates some of the characteristics of people from this group. Maybe characters playing dress up as others, or portrayals of cultures as costumes instead of something that they'd authentically wear. Unless it's inappropriate, it is appropriate. An example might be Suki's kimono, or might be other storybooks where it is respectfully done, not necessarily as a token or as something to laugh at or something to count. Also be aware, specifically with the Asian American Pacific Islanders, that Asian cultures are not interchangeable. One Asian culture is very, very different from another, and they all have their own rich histories. Asian Americans as model minorities, they're the ones who get all the straight A's and are good at computers and martial arts, as I mentioned. And we talked about African American women and men of color. And then also remember, as I mentioned before, omission is a form of bias. So sometimes we omit books that have these specific topics: homeless families, families with an incarcerated parent, transgender adults and children, families with 2 dads or 2 moms, single parents, musicians, artists or writers, blue-collar workers, rural families, people of Arab descent, and or families who practice Islam. So when we don't have these books, that is the form of bias. We need to make sure our children have availability to as many books as we can find with all of these different families, different children. Okay, that was a lot of evaluation criteria, and I'd love to hear what other evaluation criteria could be added. So I'm going to go to the Q&A. Let me go over to the chat. Yes, absolutely. So David mentioned, I appreciate it, David, it should be age and developmentally appropriate. So books that I have in my collection for my preschoolers are going to be very different than the books I have in my collection for second graders. And even if it is a wonderful book and you really want it, you really want it to help mold your children and give them the exposure, you have to make sure it is developmentally appropriate. That is a huge issue. And what equality and equity and race education looks like in a 3-year-old classroom is going to look very different than a 5-year-old, very different than a 9-year-old classroom. So thanks, David, for mentioning, should definitely be developmentally appropriate. What other criteria? Absolutely, Judy, thank you so much. Purchasing books from vendors and businesses owned by persons of color. Raising Reader, we use over 40 different publishers, and one of our primary publishers is Leon Low Books. It is the largest multicultural children's book publisher in the United States. So that is very important to us. We love our small house publishers. We love our publishers that are owned by persons of color and who are producing the books that need to be produced and have been for years. Great. Absolutely. So Ruth, in the Q&A, Ruth has 2 questions. How can you teach children about differences when we can really express our own beliefs to each other if it is not according to agency policies? For example, traditions we do every year. Absolutely. I'd love to open that up to everyone because I don't have all the answers. I have my own thoughts about that. You know, when we have diverse books, we also have to when we have the value of wanting to make sure we have representation in diverse books, sometimes not everyone's ready for those titles. And so with David's point about it being age and developmentally appropriate, you know, that's the first step. If your agency policy is not, doesn't acknowledge traditions that you do every year, I can't necessarily say because I'm not Head Start or the agency, but definitely trying to have open conversations of how to celebrate everyone and all ethnicities and cultures and traditions, not just one. So I think sometimes when policies are created, we generally look toward one type of tradition. And then Ruth also asked, can you add religion learning diversity? In general, the education and religion don't mix, but people still practice things. Absolutely. So sometimes culture and religion go hand in hand. I try to find books, Ruth, that represent the culture, and it can be difficult to find a book that is culturally representative that doesn't also bring in the religion. So when I'm looking at those books, I try to have the lens of, is this book telling the reader that it's right or wrong to believe something? Is this book trying to, you know, misrepresented with the religion, or is the book pushing a religion? So there are books that push the religion, that talk about, you know, this religion's right and others may be wrong, and then there are the books that just mention, you know, that we pray, you know, we pray 5 times a day, or we go to church on Sunday, or we go to temple, we go to synagogue, whatever those might be. I think it's okay for those books to talk about what they do, but where typically Raising a Reader at this time draws a line is kind of that, the pushing of one religion over another being superior. I'm not sure if I answered that question, but I hope so. Great. Any others? Yeah, absolutely. So Judy also mentioned choosing books that do not depict violence. Absolutely. We've had, I review books all the time, and it's amazing how many depict violence, or certain areas are violent, or a certain group of people are people to be feared. Great. These are great additions to the evaluation criteria that I'll make sure I add. We're not omitted specifically, but I love having more to add. Great. So let's move on. So some evaluation resources. Like I mentioned, Lee & Low Books is the nation's largest multicultural children's book publisher. And they have a classroom library questionnaire. So you can take a look at all of the books and answer. You print the sheet out, I print it out, and you answer the questions. You have strongly agree, maybe you're neither, disagree, and strongly disagree. They have a lot of other tools that you can use for building your own library, because we realize that it's a lot of information to take in at once, and sometimes these questionnaires are really helpful. Also, places where you can find culturally responsive titles. So these are 6 awards from the American Library Association. There is just a couple: the Coretta Scott King Book Award, Purabelle PreK, American Indian Youth Literature, Rainbow Project, Ezra Jack Keats, the Siebert Informational Book Medal. I always look for these books in my first go round when I'm searching out children's books. There are so many places to find high quality, multicultural, and diverse children's books. These are just my top. If I were to throw my top 10, these would be them. The Brown Bookshelf, Diversity in YA, American Indians and Children's Literature, Kid World Citizen. So these are some of my go-to places to find books for children. These are also some of my go-to places. Some publishers, there's certain websites such as Social Justice Books, We Need Diverse Books. The ALA has a rainbow list, Diverse Book Finder. So I won't read all of them. I've read most of them, but I won't read all of these. But these are some additional go-to places I go for finding children's books. Please feel free to put it in the chat if you have additional places you go to find children's books. And one thing about these go-to places is that it's more than just fictional books. They're doing fiction, they're doing nonfiction. Lee & Low in particular has a lot of books about poetry, historical fiction. So there are a lot of different genres represented. And that is one thing that I really like about some of these go-to resources. So what are some of your must-have books? I would love, these are a few books that I just rattled off my brain yesterday. Yeah, absolutely. You're going to be able to get a copy of this presentation. I'll PDF it, and Fernando, I believe, will send it out later on this week or early next week. So what are some of your must-have books? Go ahead and put it in the chat. What are some of your favorites that are coming out? Maybe they're longtime favorites. Jennifer says Tortillas para Mama. I love that. SEL books for toddlers, absolutely. I have not read Eyes That Kiss in the Corners, but that is on my Amazon list that is to be delivered. Picture book. Too much tamales. Is it too many tamales? If you haven't read Julian is a Mermaid, it's a great book. Now they have Julian at the Wedding, Brown Bear, Little Books. Oh, I love those. Yep. These are great. Great suggestions. Perfect. All right. Well, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Raising a Reader, and I'm going to show you some more books that are in our collection. In case you didn't know, Raising a Reader was created based on the literacy crisis back in 1999. And unfortunately, the crisis is still here today. Less than half, we are leaving behind half of our kids. Actually, 60% of our kids are not reading it at the 3rd grade reading level. When they get to past 3rd grade, we're leaving 60% of those children behind. So Raising a Reader was created in response to that literacy crisis. Our program is all about children developing, practicing, and maintaining home-based literacy routines with their beloved grown-ups. We work all across the country and with about 300 agencies, and we serve about 130 to 150,000 children every year. But what I wanted to show you the most is, of course, we work with Head Starts, YMCAs, you can see all of these types of agencies, is number one, we don't just want to have the books available. Number one, we want families to receive training. We want families to feel as if they can actualize as their child's first and most important teacher through empowerment, the training, the education, and that positive reinforcement that we know changes behaviors. Children get a bright red bag full of multicultural, high quality children's books every week, and we connect families to the library. Our model is a train the trainer model and shows impact. So we know that when families participate in our program, they're showing statistically significant positive changes in their children's overall preparedness, literacy, and family routines. We know that books have to be both windows and mirrors. And we have over 3,000 titles in our collection, like I mentioned, working with those at least 40 or more publishers across the country. So I wanted to show you a couple of previews of the books, and I realized that we have 4 minutes left. These 30-minute webinars go by so quickly. So this is just a couple collection previews for our 0 to 2, our ages 3 to 4, some of my favorites here, our pre-K. So if you needed some book inspirations, these might be them as well. Kindergarten and school age. We go from ages 0 to all the way to age 8. And so one of our, the books are the most valuable part of our program, and we really pride ourselves in having multicultural, equitable, and diverse books. One thing I also wanted to share with you that I shared before was our Super Summer Learning Adventures Pack. And these are great to help support the summer learning goals, get children ready for pre-K or kindergarten for next school year. And so these have it's just chock full of resources with those high quality multicultural children's books. There are 4 of them. Everything is bilingual, from the family guide to the highlights magazine to the children's books. To the I Feel I Can poster that talks about social emotional development. And one thing I wanted to make sure everyone knew here was that we have educator packs, but also, I'm going to go back, but also there's grant funding available. So if you are within the Region 9 Head Start Association or anywhere across the country and you are serving family childcare homes, home daycares, or family friend and neighbor care, make sure you get in contact with us because there's some matching grant funding. If you are in so separate to that, so if you are serving families in those types of settings, give us a call. If you're also in California, we have specific funding, specific donors for the California, certain regions in California. So if you meet any one of those criteria, email my colleague Kristen Anderson at kanderson@raisingareader.org because there is funding opportunities available. So I had to skip over a lot today. I realized we have 2 minutes left, and I would love to hear any questions that you might have. Is Scholastic a good site for children's books? Scholastic definitely has an initiative with high quality multicultural children's books, and they're doing a great job with finding own voices authors. Some of our favorite authors are Scholastic authors. I will go to Scholastic, yes, but might go even deeper in some of the websites that I had on this presentation, or specifically Lee and Low Books. Nellie asks, is Raising a Reader for infants and toddlers? Absolutely, we have infant and toddler packs. We go from ages 0 to 8, sometimes even prenatal with the teen parent classes or prenatal classes all the way up to 2nd grade. You can enroll families in Raising a Reader. So how it works is your agency becomes a Raising a Reader affiliate and you implement the program. So you can feel free to email me, Armstrong at raisingareader.org. Fernando will give out my information. I'll put it right here in the chat box. and we can talk about how you can become a Raising affiliate. Is there funding in early Head Start in California? Jennifer, thanks for asking that. Go ahead and email us about it, and we'll look into how you're serving children and families. And then Gloria just asks, what do you think of books that have a read-along wand to guide early readers? Back a long time ago, when we were doing read-alouds, we kind of followed with our finger, and so children could kind of see that cadence. I think it just depends on the way the pendulum is swinging. So we could be into those wands and we could be right out, and maybe that's not a best practice anymore. I haven't read into it in quite some time, so I wouldn't be able to tell you like my opinion per se, but I think if it helps your children stay on task, it might give them a focal point so that they're paying attention. You have to do what works well for your children. Great. All right. Perfect. Well, again, thank you all for joining us. I realize we're a minute over, so thank you so much for investing your time with us this afternoon. And I can't wait to hear from you if you're interested in raising a reader or finding out more about diverse children's books.
Well, excellent. Thank you so much, Rebecca, for taking the time and joining us today. And thanks everybody for tuning in. Before we wrap up, just wanted to remind everybody that this session was recorded and we'll clean it up, and we should have it ready for on-demand access roughly in the next 24 to 48 hours. So keep an eye on a follow-up email that's going to contain a link to the recording. We're going to send out a PDF version of Rebecca's slides so you can follow along, get the contact information, the list of books, all that good stuff. So keep an eye for that follow-up. Thanks again, Rebecca, for taking the time. Excellent information, and thanks everybody, and I hope to see you on the next one.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody.